What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? Was working the evening shift at a gas station. Man comes in all disoriented. I go to help him out. He has a gash on his head and doesn't know where he was. I couldn't see any crashes around, so assumed he had fallen or something. Normally we are supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store. I, being a nice human being, went to help while calling the police EMS. They got there and checked him out. They thought his head may have been fractured. Took him to the ER. I went back to work. Cops stopped back by for some coffee a few hours later. They told me the guy got hit by a baseball bat trying to break into a little girl's bedroom and was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. I never left the register area at night again. Kudos to the slugger that hit him. Plot twist, it was the 6-year-old. The Lake Neos disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. My science teacher in high school was in the Peace Corps and one of the first people to come across this village after it happened. He said it was so eerie because all the flies and mosquitoes had died and it was so silent. All the flies and mosquitoes had died. This scares me far more than the death of the people and livestock. Because no matter where you go, you always expect for at least one fly or mosquito to be there. But to find even those things dead, my God. John List killed his whole family, wife, mother, daughter and 2 sons. He meticulously planned the whole thing, cancelling all delivery services, excusing the kids from school, and even turned the air conditioning as low as possible to preserve the bodies for as long as possible. After he killed them all, he placed the bodies in sleeping bags and lined them up. He then wrote a letter to his pastor explaining why he had to kill them. He then leaves and isn't heard from again. 18 years later he's remarried and doing the same job as before, but this time he doesn't have any children. He's finally arrested after a tip was given to the FBI. Crazy thing is that because he planned it so well, the bodies weren't discovered until a month after the murders, so he had a huge head start and essentially started a new life in the same career and was heavily involved in a new church town in Virginia. Took 18 years to capture him. What did the letter say that he left? He pretty much explained that he killed his family to ensure their entry into heaven because he was worried they were straying from their faith. So in a way, he thought he was saving their souls. Killers like that are the scariest. He thought he had a noble reason, but in reality he was crazy. The story of Mary Vincent always stands out to me. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary was hitchhiking. A man named Lawrence Singleton picked her up. He brutally raped her, and eventually made her get out of the car. She planned to run, but he noticed, and cut both her arms off. He threw her into a ditch ravine and left her to die. She packed her stumps with mud to stop the bleeding and spent all night crawling out. She eventually makes it to the highway and starts walking, naked and covered in blood. The first car that saw her sped away in fear. The second car was a couple on their honeymoon. They picked her up and she survived. Edited to add, I was in a rush when I wrote this, so you should definitely read more into the story, it's crazy. From the horrific act itself, to the court proceedings, to the fact that he hardly served any time. What really upsets me most about this is that Singleton was released from jail for good behavior and went on to murder a different woman a few years later, Roxanne Hayes. I think in these scenarios we can safely say that if you can rape someone, chop their fucking arms off and leave them to die, you aren't ever safe to be released. One of my friends had someone following her home, hiding in the bushes so they couldn't be seen. She booked it to her house, got inside, and he was watching the house from the outside. She called the cops. They come along quietly and got the jump on him. He had condoms, handcuffs, and a knife. When they got his DNA, it turned out that he was linked to a half-dozen rapes in the area. She credits her regimen of running sprints to outrunning him that night and firmly believes she would have been raped if she couldn't outrun him then. Rule number 1, cardio. In my town in the early 90s there was a notorious killer that had all of British Columbia, Canada on watch. My wife's mother, years and years before I knew them, had been home alone while her husband was in England doing tree surgeon work, arborist. She was in her laundry room when a man walked up from her basement, completely scaring her. She freaked out and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He said he was friends with her husband and was just coming to see if he was here. Apparently he told him he could just walk in. Which she knew was bullshit. She was smart enough to tell him that he was just at the store and would be back any minute. He said he would wait outside for him. As soon as he left she called the police, but he was long gone by the time they got here. 2 weeks later, the killer was caught, his mugshot put on TV, and it was the guy in her house. My family has a similar story, and I'm pretty sure some of you serial killer buffs out there might figure out who it is before the reveal, because their story is pretty unique. When my parents were in college they went on a trip down to Florida. They had met through mutual friends and were down there together but hadn't gone on a date yet. My dad and one of his friends were planning to meet my mom and some of her friends at a hotel, but being the carefree college guys they lost track of time and realized it was impossible to get to the hotel on time by walking. They decided the best solution to their problem was to hitchhike, and a car with 2 women picked him up. Everything seemed fine until the driver asked them if it was okay to stop for gas. My dad and his friend agreed it was no problem since they were making good time, and she drove into a gas station. She then pumped her car full of gas before hopping back in and flooring it, basically stealing the gas with 2 hitchhikers in the back. My dad and his friend were beginning to freak out when she pulled a gun from under her seat and asked, "Are we gonna have a problem?" or something like that. My dad and his friend shook their heads vehemently, because what else do you do in that situation? She then drove them to the hotel and dropped them off without so much as a scratch, and they kinda thought nothing of it until the news started reporting on a serial killer in Florida known as Aileen Wuornos. He took one look at her picture and instantly recognized her as the driver. The only reason my dad thinks she didn't straight up kill them was because they were super polite and respectful to her, and her victims were usually scumbag guys trying to take advantage of her. TL, Dr. Aileen Wuornos is the reason my dad got to his first date with mom on time. 3 sailors survived the sinking of the SS West Virginia at Pearl Harbor, only to die 16 days later, due to the lack of air. The Navy knew they were there, but couldn't get to them. Harrison Oken, a 2013 Nigerian boat sinking, was trapped in the boat for 3 days at the bottom of the ocean. At 5:30 the diver finds the area Harrison is in, sees a hand a few feet from his face and reaches out to grab it. Only then did they realize the person was alive. 30 seconds later the diver enters the air pocket Harrison has been surviving in. Wow! What a moment for everyone involved. I can't imagine 3 days, and then suddenly a person appears. He said it felt like 6 hours to him. I've heard that being trapped in complete darkness changes your sleep cycles and takes away your ability to perceive time. It's really creepy to think about for some reason. Mostly because I'm afraid if the dark, but my dad and some friends got drunk and went for a drive on some back roads and were going as fast as the truck would go as teenagers. My dad was slightly less drunk than the others and eventually demanded they let him get out. They pulled over and he and one other girl got out. He and the girl started walking to town while the other 3 sped off in the opposite direction. Well, less than a mile up the road from where they got out is an extremely sharp turn, which they missed and hit a tree going pretty close to triple digits, miles per hour. 2 of them died on impact, and the only reason the 3rd survived is because they crashed in front of a house that 2 doctors lived in. The survivor was paralyzed and lost his leg and part of his arm and was in the hospital for 8 months before dying. This was in the 60s, so medical care wasn't what it is today. When I first got my permit my dad took me to that corner to explain the importance of safe driving. It gave me goosebumps about how close he was to being in the truck. He said that the dad of the driver got what remained of the truck to be hung up in the center of town for months after, to be a warning to all. That's terrifying. I missed a situation like this years ago. Was hanging out with a buddy at the bars and we leave to go back to his place for some smoke and video games. His roommate comes home from work, he was a bartender, and tells us he's heading out to the bars and asks if we want to go, he'll drive. We go back and forth but eventually decide to stay in. Turns out, the buddy had been drinking heavily at work, but we couldn't tell. He ended up flipping his Jeep off of an overpass and dropping 20+ feet. The entire back of his Jeep, where I would have been sitting, was crushed into the back of the front seat. The roll bar was smashed into the passenger side. Buddy ended up getting some serious brain injuries and spent the next few years learning how to walk and talk again. He's still pretty off and much different than he used to be. My other buddy and I came very close to a similar or worse fate. This is a hometown story that stayed with me. It happened literally right around the corner from where I grew up, maybe a 2-minute drive away. Judy Kirby murdered 6 children and 1 adult by intentionally driving the wrong way on a divided highway in an attempt to commit suicide. She had been hospitalized for depression, but had also just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother and was by some reports involved in drug trafficking and fearing an imminent arrest. She picked up her sister's son, who was celebrating his 10th birthday that day. She then loaded her 3 children into the car, supposedly to pick up a gift for the nephew. Instead, she went missing with the carload of kids. A short time later, calls started coming into 911 about a car going the wrong way down the highway at a high rate of speed. They made it about 90 seconds before a head-on collision with another vehicle, driven by a father with 2 children and another child along for the ride. The crash annihilated both vehicles. The only survivors were Kirby herself, and the child who was along for the ride in the other car. There were pieces of children all over the highway. She was sentenced to 215 years in prison. This sounds exactly like the story of There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane, another real-life event where a woman drove a van full of children down the wrong way while being high on some drug, before eventually hitting another car and killing herself and the kids. Really odd the similarities between Judy Kirby and Diane Schuler's cases. Edit, had forgotten the details of Diane's case, but she had apparently been horribly drunk. Empty handle of vodka found at the scene plus blood alcohol content twice the legal limit in autopsy, and had tested positive for THC in her system. My brother's ex-GF had 2 older sisters. They died before she was born. One day they decided to play hide and seek or something, so anyway, they both climbed inside a chest and accidentally locked themselves in. They suffocated. That is terrifying. It's particularly terrifying to me because I remember when I was younger something similar almost happened to me and my cousin. She had a daybed and we decided to get behind it and push it against the wall so we could play and nap in the dark. It got unbearably hot and we realized we couldn't breathe after about 30 minutes. If it wouldn't have also gotten so hot from our fear body heat lack of oxygen, we might have actually suffocated because we were getting lightheaded. It was scary, but eventually we pulled the bed away from the wall. I have no idea how that could happen on carpet. Bizarre freak accidents are just so strange. I'm truly sorry for you brothers XGF. Edit, the bed. Years ago when I was 8 my family lived in this big weird house kind of on the edge of a small town. The school district was in the middle of a big restructuring, so even though we were only a couple grades apart, my brother and I went to different schools and took different buses. This left me as the last person to leave in the morning and the first person to get home in the afternoon, which meant it was my job to make sure all the lights were off and the door was locked. One morning I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on, so before I left I turned off the light and closed the door. When I got home that afternoon the light was on and the door was open again. I just assumed that I'd forgotten to actually take care of it when I noticed it in the morning, so I went over to turn off the light and close the door. When I got to the top of the basement stairs I looked and there was a big shadowy male figure towards the bottom of the staircase. I freaked out, slammed the door and pushed a bunch of boxes against it and then went and hid in my closet. For months I didn't tell my family because I was positive what I had seen was a ghost and didn't think anyone would believe me. Then about a year after that incident my mom and her boyfriend realized that small amounts of money had been going missing for months, totaling around $800 to $900, but never more than $60 at once. So we all walked around the house with flashlights trying to figure out how they could have gotten in. Turns out some creep was climbing in through a small hole in the outside of the house, shimmying through a crawl space, then coming up into the house through the basement. Realizing I had been alone in the house with him on at least one occasion was one of the worst, most terrifying moments I've ever had. Home invasion is seriously one of the scariest things that can happen to a person. The home is like a final refuge from the world, and to have it violated like that is so unnerving. My wife called me while I was at Walmart one day. She had a broken ankle and had just had surgery on her hernia. Her mobility was like 5 out of 100. And of course someone tried to break in. Her saving grace was yelling through the door that she was on the phone with cops. Really with me. I'm on the way home. And I pass the guy. To the exact description my wife gave me and the cops. I swerved his ass off his bike, hopped out the car and sat my fat ass on top of him until the cops got to where I was. Guy had a gun, rope, lock tools. It could have been bad. Luckily though he ran. And with even more luck we crossed paths. He could have went anywhere when he left my yard, but he came straight towards the Walmart I was leaving that was about 3 minutes away. Edit. I've had a few DMs questioning the authenticity of this. I can't prove it other than you-induced lobotomy was in the car with me when it went down. I'll tell you one that happened to me, or rather, I was witness to. One night, I was out at a bar with a friend I was visiting in New Rochelle, New York. We went outside for a cigarette, and a car came flying past the bar. The car burned through a red light, and started going up this hill that was on a curve. We watched as he veered over the double yellow, and smashed head-on with another car coming from the other direction. Both cars' hind ends lifted up, then slammed down. The car that was driving correctly burst into flames. I ran inside and grabbed the fire extinguisher, then yelled to the bartender to call 911 and say there has been an accident. My friend, a few other patrons, and me ran to the cars. Now, I used to think this was a fictional trope, but I was pretty drunk before this happened, and I swear it sobered me up instantly. I tried spraying the fire, but it did nothing. The fumes and heat were awful, and all we could do was stand back. The worst part was, and this will haunt me forever, was that the woman in the burning car was screaming as she died. My God, it was the worst sound ever. The fire department came and put the fire out. The police took us back to the bar and took statements. I found out the next day in the news, that the car that was not speeding was being driven by a young woman coming home late from work. She was a block away from home, and I think she was either newly married or a new mother. The rotten motherfucker driving the other car was some rich drunk cocksucker. He lost a leg, but otherwise was physically unharmed. I have no clue if he did time, as I left to go back home a day or so later. I'm trying to find a link for the news story, but I can't, as this was maybe 6 or 7 years back. I remember it being reported on Low HUD and Channel 12 News. This is probably the thing that freaks me out the most. The entire randomness of it, and yet it is fairly common. I work as a firefighter and have seen plenty of drunk driver-caused deaths. Rarely, I have a quick mini-freak in my head while I'm driving. But then I convince myself it probably won't happen to me. Nutty Putty Cave in Utah was sealed up in 2009 after John Jones was trapped upside down in a small crevice while spelunking. When rescue teams finally arrived, he had been upside down for so long that his legs were drained of blood. The only possible way to have gotten him out was to break his legs, which would have sent him into fatal shock. He died after being trapped for 28 hours. His body's still in the cave. Didn't they almost get him out, but then one of the pulleys snapped and he got trapped even worse? That's my personal nightmare. Yes. This story is why I'm never going spelunking. One of many stories. In general, I wouldn't say I'm claustrophobic. But fuck caves. Years ago, my now husband worked for an industrial laundry company in their head office when a PR disaster happened that also mentally screwed up a number of people. Their company collected laundry from large hospitals and medical-type businesses, e.g. care homes, etc., and cleaned them. You can imagine the sort of heavy-duty cleaning, bleaching, boiling, etc. needed to remove those sort of biological contaminants. One day a laundry cart went through the usual bleaching, boiling cycle before it dropped out into a conveyor belt to be sorted for drying pressing when there was a horrid scream. A small newborn baby's body had been discovered tangled up amongst the sheets. It had been cooked. The laundry workers were distraught. The whole place had to be shut down. Police called and the laundry tracked back to the hospital to discover what happened. It turns out thankfully in some ways, stillborn baby had been left in the cot waiting to be taken down to the hospital mortuary after the parents had said their goodbyes and covered it with a blanket. But somehow one of the nurses hadn't realized, just on shift was the best guess, so just grabbed up all the linen out the cot and off the bed in the delivery room with the body bundled inside, and emptied it into the laundry hamper trolley thing. The other nurses' parents assumed the baby had been collected by the mortuary to be stored awaiting their funeral decisions. The laundry was found not to be to blame, but the parents were devastated and the hospital took a lot of flack. The poor laundry workers who discovered the body ended up being given counseling before eventually quitting. The laundry did amend its practice to individually emptying each laundry hamper into the industrial machines instead of just tipping them in to stop anything like that happening again. Edit, just found it in the newspaper. Turns out I misremembered the how of getting into the laundry basket slightly wrong. I had to dig through my hospital's biohazard trash because a nurse had thrown out a fetus. Probably the worst day of work I've ever had. Did you find it? Yes, I found it, after about 3 hours. Wasn't a fully formed baby yet, but it was pretty disturbing to find. All the other stuff I had to sift through was just the icing on the cake. That Oi box killer and his transcripts. If you absolutely want to have your day ruined, this has to be one of the most disturbing, creepiest things ever. Serial killer David Parker Ray would play these tapes for his victims, so they had an idea of what was coming and to also mentally break them. Hear the start of one tape to give you an idea. Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained. Gagged. Probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared, too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal, under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23, 1993 as a general advisory tape for future female captives. Can you imagine how terrifying it would be to wake up in a place you didn't know and have someone play these tapes for you telling you what horrible things were going to happen to you before you died? If I remember correctly, he had accomplices, people who were aware. That's seriously fucked up on so many levels. He had a girlfriend. She helped lure victims. And she just went free, I think. Yup. Cynthia Cindy Hendy. The victim who escaped still has a public Facebook page. My wife arrived at her parents' house that she was currently living in due to health issues of her father's. She got into the house, no one else was there at the time, and instead of going further in, stopped in the first room that held the computers, which was right by the door. She went into the room and was messing around on the internet when one of the cats came into the room. Her cat, to be precise. Well, this cat was super laid back. Loved everyone and never picked fights or got aggressive. He would literally lay down and let squirrels throw pecans at him from trees and do nothing but take it. Not tonight, however. Tonight he was growling and hissing intermittently while standing between my wife and the entrance to the rest of the house. A laid-back sweet old cat was acting like he was going to rip out a throat. Well, my wife decided that this was really fucking weird, so she picked up her cat and left the house. Lo and behold, she sees a cop car patrolling down her street and flagged them down. She explained the situation and they demanded, that she stay in their cruiser while they both checked it out. Turns out they found the back door wide open, super bad. Her parents and her never leave the door unlocked, much less open. She came to find out later from those cops that they were hunting down a serial rapist that had been spotted in the area, and that was why they were rolling down a safe, normally, residential street. Super spooky. Life pro tip: always trust the cat. I used to have an incredibly chill, skittish little Siamese cat. Not a fighter. Not a ruffian. She would hide under the bed when anyone but me was in the house. Landlords and repair workers would say, "I thought you said you had a cat." But she was extremely loyal to me and bonded to me. I was living in an attic apartment where the front door opened onto stairs, and then the stairs went straight up into the living room. One night she is standing at the foot of the stairs inside the house, yowling her fool head off. Just howling and yowling and really going to town. I'm half asleep and listening to her and wondering WTF, wishing she would stop. Then I hear it. A hand grabs the doorknob and turns it. Click. Turns it again. Click. Turns it again. Click. Someone is quietly but forcefully trying to jimmy open the door by twisting the doorknob hard in the middle of the night. Boom, I'm awake. My feet are on the floor. I'm like immediately vertical. And my cat races to the top of the stairs, looks me in the eyes and falls silent. She had done her job and gotten my ass up. This is about 2 a.m. and my boyfriend at the time would sometimes come home super late from his overnight job. So the first thing I do is call him and whisper, asking him if he's trying to get in the front door. He says, "What? Fuck no, call the cops now. Turn on all the lights in the house, make noise, get off the phone with me, and call the cops. Then call me right back." I do that, and the doorknob stops. The cops come and search the area and the block and find no one. It never happened again. After that I also barricaded the door. I'll never forget that what could have been an extremely dangerous if not potentially brutal situation in the middle of the night was foiled by my gentle little scaredy cat Pussycat with big saucer eyes, who was terrified of her shadow. But when shit got real, she woke my ass up. I couldn't have asked more of a dog. Cats are badass. Never doubt it. My girl has gone on across the rainbow bridge, as they say. But I'll always treasure her loyalty and intelligence in this. Have you heard of the Nazi so bad that other Nazis, in particular fellow SS Nazis, constantly tried to get him and his unit disbanded and arrested? No? Well, his name was Oskar Dirlewanger, and his unit was nicknamed the Black Hunters or the Dirlewanger Brigade. Oskar Dirlewanger was an early adopter of the Nazi Party. He had been thrown in jail before for being a pedophile. Eventually, when World War II broke out and healthy ideal Germans were dying in droves on the Eastern Front, Oskar's old pal Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, granted him a command of a unit made up originally of German poachers, and eventually German criminals being held in civilian jails camps, and military criminals. His unit was essentially designated as a rearguard unit meant to hunt down enemy partisans, or in most cases civilians in occupied countries. Oskar Dirlewanger SS unit was responsible for many atrocities. Some atrocities so barbaric and bad other SS units reported him and his unit for atrocities. A few examples, which have been popularized in film, include taking an entire village in Belarus and putting them in a church, locking the doors, and setting the church ablaze. Anyone who tried to escape was shot by machine guns and rifles. This unit raped, tortured, and murdered its way through Eastern and Central Europe. During the Warsaw Uprising they were sent to help squelch the uprising. One of their atrocities committed was going into a children's hospital, telling the nurses and staff that they were there to secure church. Okay. Once the church was secured, they raped the female staff, and some of the wounded and sick female children victims, and then went around shooting everyone. If anyone was found to have survived, they were bayoneted. These guys were so horrible that other Nazis looked down their noses at them, and constantly filed complaints and reports against them, but with no real success. Thankfully, by the end of the war this unit was destroyed and its leaders and criminal soldiers were hunted down like rabid animals. From an article. The Red Army pushed west and a Soviet soldier shot him in the chest. Dirlewanger survived and went into hiding. French authorities later captured him in Altschausen in southern Germany after the war. They tossed him into a camp to await trial, but he never made it. The French authorities at the time claimed Dirlewanger died of natural causes, but the man's cellmate said he watched as Polish guards beat him to death. If Polish guards did beat him to death, then it was an appropriate end to one of World War II's most savage war criminals. The French authorities at the time claimed Dirlewanger died of natural causes. Considering the atrocities he committed, being beaten to death should be considered natural cause of death for him.
I'll get straight to the point. I found marijuana in the house. And while I never thought of myself as the type of father who...